Hello and welcome to Service Objects video tutorial series. For today's tutorial, we'll be setting up a trigger and a class in Salesforce that'll call out to our dots address validation 3 web service. If you don't already know, Salesforce is an extremely powerful, extensible, and customizable CRM. One of the great things that we like about Salesforce here at Service Objects is the ability to call out to APIs so that the data going into your CRM can be validated and verified before it gets entered. This means that you can call out to any of our APIs from Salesforce. You can use this video as an overview for how to integrate any of the services, but for this specific example, we'll be using dots address validation 3. To participate in this tutorial, you need the following items: a Service Objects web service key, whether that is a trial key or a production key. You can sign up for a free trial key at www.serviceobjects.com. You will need a developer account in Salesforce. You will also need a working knowledge of Salesforce and Apex, which is the native programming language inside Salesforce. And we will go ahead and get started. To start off, one of the first things we'll need to do is add the Service Objects endpoint into the list of allowed endpoints that Salesforce is allowed to contact within your developer platform. To do this, you can navigate here and type in remote site settings, or just remote, and the remote site settings field will pop up. And here you'll see a list of all the websites that your Salesforce platform is allowed to contact. And so in my account here, you can see I have ws.serviceobjects.com and wsbackup.serviceobjects.com. And to add a new site, you'll go and select new remote site, give it an appropriate name, and you will type in the URL here. So you can see for this example, I'm going to type in trial.serviceobjects.com, which will only work if you have a trial license key. If you have a production key, you want to add ws.serviceobjects.com and wsbackup.serviceobjects.com, as those will be the two primary URLs that you will be hitting with your production Service Objects account. This trial.serviceobjects.com URL will only work with trial license keys. So you click Save and New, or just Save. And we can see here, if we go back to our remote site settings, you can see that trial.serviceobjects.com was successfully added to our remote site settings. Now that we have successfully added the Service Objects endpoint, we'll want to add some custom objects in our contact field that will hold some of the values that are returned by our dots address validation 3 web service. And to do that, we'll scroll down and go to Customize. In our example, we're using the contacts field, but you can add custom fields to whatever field is most appropriate for your application. And we'll select Add Custom Field to Contacts. Once we are here, we will scroll down and scroll to this contact custom fields and relationship, and you can see here I have several custom fields here already defined. I have a DPV, mostly DPV information, and error information, which are fields that will parse out from our address validation 3 response. So I'll just go ahead and add another field here for the sake of, example, and for this field, we're going to add the isResidential flag that comes back from the address validation 3 service. So for this, we'll select text, select next, and here we're going to go ahead and enter an appropriate field name, which I have in my clipboard. So we're going to call it dots address val underscore isResidential. And so if you hover over this little I, it'll say this is the label. Yep. This is the label to be used on displays, page layouts, reports, and list views. So this will be a more of a pretty type display. You'll want to name it something more appropriate and something that'll work better in your workflow, but for our example, we're just gonna name it this. And for length, we're gonna do length of 15. And for the field name, we're just gonna call it address addr val is residential. And so this is the internal field name here. When you're calling an internal field name, you'll have to add a double underscore and C in the Apex class, and we'll see an example of that in the next piece of code that we're going to add. But we'll select next. You'll select the appropriate field level security here. Hit next again, and go ahead and click Save. To add the actual code that will call out to our AV3 web service, we'll scroll down here, go to develop Apex classes. And I've already added the class to my developer console, but just for the sake of example, I'll go ahead and delete it and re-add it. I already have the code in a text editor, so I'm just going to copy and paste that and then just go over the code and explain some key points of it. And now that I have my code copy and pasted in, I'll walk through some key elements of it. So in the sample code that we have some extra commented out information here that gives you some resources like the product page, the developer guide, and you can download the sample code along with this tutorial, so you don't have to pause the video and type it out and everything. But the first thing we do is instantiate some of the HTTP request objects in this call WS by ID method, and we'll pull back the contact that has just been added. And so we'll pull back all these fields: mailing street, mailing city, postal code, and state, as well as the custom DPV and error information fields that we've entered into Salesforce. And so to call an internal field, an internal custom field that you've created in Salesforce, you'll need to add this $_C at the end of it. And so you can see that we've done that here and other places where we reference these objects in the code. And here you can see we set the endpoint of the request to the trial URL endpoint, and this will point to the get best matches JSON operation. So this will return a JSON formatted output. And we've URL encoded all of the address information here, as you can see with this encoding util.url encode, and we'll encode it to the UTF-8 standard. And another thing to note here is that you'll have to put in your license key in this field here. So right now we just have it as a generic WS72, XXX, etc. But you'll want to put in your specific license key. And here we'll send the request to the service. And if the response back is null, then that means there was something wrong with the primary endpoint. So we'll come back here and check out our backup endpoint. And for this example, it's pointing to the same URL, the same trial endpoint. But if you have a production key, you want to point this primary URL to ws.serviceobjects.com and this backup URL to wsbackup.serviceobjects.com. And you'll want to be sure to change both the license keys to whatever your license key is. And after that failover configuration, we'll see here we check the status code, and if it's equal to 200, then we'll go into processing the response from the service. We'll create some internal address fields here, and we'll initialize the error response here to none, which would indicate that no error was returned from the service. And so what this does is it traverses through the JSON response of the service, and it finds the appropriate field. For this case, we'll see if it finds address 1, it'll set our initial address field to the address 1 that was returned from the service. And that'll be the standardized and validated address information that is returned. So we do that with all the fields that are pertinent to us, the DPV and DPV description and DPV notes description, as well as the is residential and error fields down here. And here you can see if we get a DPV score equal to 1, that indicates that the address is mailable, it is deliverable, and it is considered good by the USPS. And this is the else statement for the 200 code check here. And so if the 200 code wasn't right, then we'll say put the error description as this generic error message. And at the end of this, we'll update the list of contacts. So we'll go ahead and click Save. Now that we have our test util class made here, we'll go ahead and scroll down, select Apex triggers, and to add a new trigger, we'll select Developer Console, select File, New, Trigger. For our name, we'll simply call it Test Trigger. And we'll go down here and select the contact object. So we have the little bit of code right here. I have the actual code in a text editor that will call the service, so I'll just copy that in. And now that I have this copied, you can see here that whenever a contact is added, or before it's inserted rather, it'll call the class that we made, which was called WS by ID, and it'll send the contact to it. And so to save this, just simply go to File and Save. If we hit refresh, we can see we now have a test trigger here. Now to add a contact and to test out our new trigger, we'll simply go up here, select Contacts, In recent contacts, you can see here we don't have any, so let's go ahead and add one. And we'll add in a fake person by the name of Jane Doe. We'll go down here to the mailing street information, and we'll enter in an address. And for this example, we're just going to use our service object's office address. And we'll put some typos in there so you can see the standardization and validation that the service objects web service does. So we'll do 27 East Coast, suite number 500. We'll do Santa Barb for Santa Barbara, and CA, and 93101. So we'll go ahead and save the contact, and you can see here that we still have the old values here, and that's because the Salesforce doesn't immediately call the outside APIs. It queues it up a little bit, but if we go and select Jane Doe again, we can see that now we have a standardized address here, and in our DPV description, we have a message that indicates, yes, this record is a valid mailing address. And for this DPV val score, we get a score of 1. And we can find the is residential. It says false, meaning this is a business address. And again, here we see the validated address. We see the USPS standardized version of the address, which is 27 East Coast Street, Suite 500, as well as the validated city and zip+4 information. This concludes our tutorial for how to add a trigger and a class that'll call out to our service objects web service. If you have any questions or any requests for other tutorials, please feel free to let us know at support@serviceobjects.com, and we'd be happy to accommodate.